On the 3rd of December, in the year of our Lord, 1976, a farmer in England looked out the window to see a pig 20 feet tall and 30 feet from snout to curly tail drifting across the sky. This is a true story, and I'd like to think some debate with his wife involving the phrase, "when pigs fly," was settled that day. When this porcine giant landed in his field, terrifying his cattle, he discovered it to be a hot air balloon. To his surprise, a rock band came looking for it, and to his greater surprise, they were not Led Zeppelin, but the Pink Floyd. The pig was named Algy, short for Algernon, which for some reason the British consider a very manly name, although it comes from the French Algernon, meaning with a mustache. Anyway, this great inflatable pig had been commissioned by the Pink Floyd lyricist Roger Waters, who'd envisioned it floating above the Battersea Power Station for the cover of the band's 1977 album Animals, a reimagining of Orwell's Animal Farm. He'd brought this idea to cover designer Storm Thorgerson, who said they could easily splice a flying pig into a photo negative with razor blades. But Roger Waters insisted it be real. So they made this giant pig-shaped dirigible to hover above the power plant. They even hired a sniper to shoot it down if it should fly off course. But it didn't quite take off, which was too bad because otherwise the shot they took that day was perfect. A photograph with looming, moody clouds and striking colors. The next day, they gathered again, and this time it fully inflated and wet. Algy was gone with the wind, and they hadn't bothered to hire a marksman again, so there was no stopping the pig's flight. It flew east over Heathrow Airport, caused panic and delays in departures and landings. It almost crossed the English Channel, but decided not to, and eventually came down on a ranch. On the third day, they launched it again and got the photo they wanted, except that on that date the skies were a clear, cheery blue, so finally Thorgerson razor-bladed the third-day pig onto the first-day clouds, and they had the album cover. It's such an iconic album cover, which I've owned on a record album, compact disc, keychain, 3-foot poster, and the coffee mug that lives on my desk. You know, the mug you never clean because for some reason you believe the daily slosh of boiling coffee keeps it sanitary. And it wasn't until I had the mug that I finally understood. The 4-corner smokestacks of the power station make the shape of a quadruped animal lying on its back, either a dog or sheep, legs in the air, defeated, with this smug pink pig hovering overhead. Spoiler alert, for those of you who bought the Pink Floyd Animals album for its cover, started listening to it, and got lost in one of its long instrumental passages, the pigs win in the end. The sheep do get amped up to a raving, drooling rebellion and kill off the dogs who've been holding them down, but the pigs who control the dogs remain large and in charge. This, in its way, is even gloomier than the fable that inspired it. Orwell's Animal Farm is one of my favorite books. I used to carry a copy around in my pocket and must have read it 18 or 19 times in the late 20th century. I'd frequently find copies of it in thrift stores for 25 cents, buy it, and then just give it to the first acquaintance I ran into on the sidewalk. But I wouldn't necessarily recommend it today. The last guy I gave a copy to was a neighbor in North Carolina, a real nice guy. But he said when he reached a certain point, he threw the book down and stomped on it because it made him so angry. But he didn't come to any of our cookouts after that, and it was too bad because he looked like Timothy Dalton and worked for a grocery store called Harris Teeter, and you could never imagine a classically trained Shakespearean actor and former James Bond saying Harris Teeter as if it were like MI6 or Harris Teeter like it was Elsinore. I couldn't even imagine eating food that had been handled in a place that called itself Harris Teeter, at least not with a straight face. So that guy really gave me a lot to think about. It's like I was once catching up with an old high school friend who works in the advertising department of Wild Turkey Liquor, and he looked me in the eye, dead serious, and asked, "Could you see yourself as a wild turkey man?" And I thought, oh, gee, I really appreciate your vote of confidence calling me any kind of man, whatever that might mean, but a wild man? A wild turkey man? No, if that's the only kind of manhood available, I think I'll have to remain a child. It's emasculating, but at least it's not hilarious. Let me ask you, and this is regardless of your gender identification, which I honor and respect. Could you see yourself as a wild turkey man? Anyway, this real nice guy who worked in a meat market called Harris Teeter destroyed a copy of Animal Farm in a rage, so I don't recommend it. And I think today it would just make people sad, because the animals who liberate themselves from a cruel totalitarian dictator, Farmer Jones, are really genuinely deceived and slip step by step into the yoke of a dictatorship of their own run by deceitful pigs. And that's the story of the Soviet Revolution, and that's the story of the American Revolution. Plus, when I was hired to teach a college-level introduction to the Old Testament, we spent the first 2 weeks of the course reading Animal Farm. And then I said, now that you've got the basic plot of the Old Testament, we can open our Bibles and fill in some of the details. Orwell's Animal Farm still has much to teach us. But if you really want to understand the modern U.S. government, you're far better off rereading Lord of the Flies, and that has a pig in it too. Or if the pig doesn't matter to you, just go on and read Heart of Darkness. Orwell may have chosen pigs to represent oppressive and exploitive leaders because of their intelligence, or because of their greed, although they're not actually more selfish or hungry than other animals. They're tougher than livestock animals, more aggressive, and maybe harder to herd. Marvin Harris, in his book Cows, Pigs, Wars, and Witches, proposes that the Hebrew pork prohibition originates with shepherds and lonely goat herds, whose flocks were mainly raised for their renewable resources. Sheep, goats, and cattle can process grasses into milk, wool, and leather. And this is a good deal, since humans can't eat grass, but we can drink the milk a goat has made out of grass. For these herders, eating animal was a rarity, generally connected to a religious ritual, sacrifice as a symbol of giving up what's most valuable and sharing it to strengthen bonds with divinity and community. But the pig eats the same foods that humans do, converting tubers and grains into super concentrated animal protein, pork. I found a book this week in someone's front yard giveaway library called Animal Servants of Man, which is comically quaint and outdated. But the chapter on swine begins with the line, "It has been said of the pig that as a food animal, nothing is wasted but his squeal." So, yes, you can eat every part of this creature, but nobody milks it. And its leather is good for nothing except, apparently, footballs. And it's historically rare, the Semitic football celebrity, so maybe that has something to do with it. So, some biblical scholars propose that the Hebrew distaste for swine was a rejection of what was considered a luxury commodity, a livestock creature that was expensive to keep and produced only a single one-time product. This is the explanation I find most plausible, but it's far from the most popular. In the history of Western religion, the number one all-time favorite answer to every theological question is, drum roll please, "Because God saith so, and shut thy mouth." By this rationale, the greatest sacrifice one can make before God is not a lamb or even a firstborn son, but the sacrifice of intellectual curiosity. Nothing, it seems, grates against God's ears like the sound of believers asking, why? Why, why, why? Why eat this and not that? Why did you even put this here? Why create it, then immediately forbid it? And why make it smell so good cooking on the neighbor's grill? Some say that's the actual reason for the Hebrew pork prohibition. You forbid pork precisely because it means you can't accept an invitation to the non-Hebrew neighbor's barbecue. There's an old rabbinic saying that if a Jew and a Gentile eat together, they're going to drink together. And if they drink together, they're going to laugh together. And while they're laughing, this guy's son and that guy's daughter are going to sneak off and go play. Next thing you know, Hebrew distinctivism has dissolved into the general gene pool. I'm paraphrasing the rabbis here, but you get the point. The Christians quickly ditched the whole kosher diet. Once you've declared your bread to be an imaginary cannibal feast, it's just silly to nitpick about bacon and shrimp. St. Peter, they say, had a vision of the whole banquet of so-called unclean creatures, including carrion birds and reptiles, maybe even a saber-toothed tiger, and God told him to, quote, kill and eat. That's how the Catholic Church was born. Jesus, we may note, never eats a rack of ribs or a bacon cheeseburger in any gospel. Actually, he doesn't seem to have liked pigs at all. He famously said, it's no good to cast your pearls before swine, for they will something with it. The Greek word he used is unclear, but whatever pigs do with pearls, it's apparently wasteful. Although, why Jesus would care about pearls is anyone's guess. One of Jesus' greatest and most mysterious miracles was when he encountered a madman living in a cemetery possessed by a whole herd of demons. So Jesus, the exorcist, allowed the demons to enter a herd of swine, who then all ran off a cliff into the sea. We'll talk about that one some other time. And in the prodigal son story, the absolute lowest a teenager could go was to end up feeding pigs and eating their food. Pigs on the Wing, Part 2. The iconic cover of the Pink Floyd Animals album. You start with a 30-foot inflatable pig. Then it's in the distance on your 12-inch record cover. Then it's a pink speck on the 5-inch booklet that comes with a compact disc. And when you find the album on a streaming service, the floating pig is a few pink pixels in the thumbnail-sized splotch of the artwork. The floating pig is slowly shrinking out of existence, which is fine, because unlike most modern music products, Animals is a piece of music, not just an image. Then, in 2017, the 40th anniversary of the album's release, my brother Peter and I went to see Roger Waters perform a concert, and when he played the song Pigs, we looked up. This giant, inflatable pig was hovering right over our heads. By this point, they'd got the thing under control. It was propelled by a drone steered by remote control, and we were in an indoor arena, so there was no danger of it floating away. Actually, this made it even more frightening, being in an enclosed space with this giant porcine horror hovering above, menacing with its searchlight eyes. Horrifying. On the other hand, the pig is one of God's creatures. And of all our four-footed barnyard buddies, it's the one that looks most like us. And with our obesity epidemic, we're also looking more like him every year. It's the most intelligent. You can see it in its beady eyes. The pig is thinking about what you're going to do next, and he's planning his next move. Relentless as a wolf, insatiable as death, remorseless as a Republican. All right, well, we don't have to like him, and we don't have to invite him over for Thanksgiving dinner and listen to his political gruntings. But I'd like to think we can at least coexist with the pig, because in the community of life, he is our country cousin, after all.